Buying a used car requires careful attention, but what about buying a used EV? We met up with Simon Acton from Next EcoCar to discuss what to look for. So welcome from the inside of a 2016 Renault Zoe, and we're joined again by Simon Acton, who is the founder and CEO of Next EcoCar. Simon, we're here because we wanted to talk about, are there dangers, are there worries by buying a used EV? Because I'm sure as people start to look at moving into EVs, they can't necessarily all afford new ones. So, is a used EV a good prospect?
From my point of view, absolutely. I mean, we've been in business for 4 years now, selling used EVs, and yeah, I can confidently say we've had minimal issues and absolutely no issues with batteries, which is the thing that most people would be concerned about. So yeah, it's definitely a good prospect, but like buying any used vehicle, it helps if you know what you're looking at.
Yeah. And
of course, buying an EV, because they're newer technology, there are very few people around who actually know what they're selling. So yeah, that's why I decided when I started the business to specialise specifically in EVs and become an expert, if you like. So yeah, they're all very good on the used market at this stage.
So obviously, look, first things first, there's probably a lot of misconceptions about buying a used EV. It's not like buying a 5 or 6 year old iPhone and the battery's knackered. Tell us a bit about the structure of batteries, because it's not just one big lump, right?
Yeah, I mean, the batteries are made up of individual cells. So I think like a 24 kilowatt leaf, for example, I think has something like 80 individual cells, and they're broken then into modules. And one of the things you can do if you have the right equipment is that you can run a diagnostic on that battery, and you can see not only the state of health of the whole battery, but also what each of the individual cells is looking like. So you might notice, for example, that one cell looks like it's got a lot less energy in it than the others, and that might be a red flag to say, hey, there might be something wrong with this battery.
Right.
But that is a very rare occurrence, to be fair. But yeah, the sort of things that I look for specifically when I'm looking at electric cars is, what's the state of health like in general, and that cell balancing, but also how it's been charged. So I mean, with the newer cars these days, it's less of a concern, but with some of the older Nissan Leafs in particular, how you charge the car could have an effect on the battery health. So there's kind of perceived wisdom that maybe if you're rapid charging all the time, that's not a good thing versus slow charging. But there's a balance there somewhere in the middle where a bit of both is good. So we can look at that information as well.
So talk us through some of the early cars. If people are starting to look at buying an EV and their budget isn't massive, what's the starting point? What's the jumping off point?
Yeah. So I suppose the Nissan Leaf's been around about 10 years now. Okay. So that would be what I would consider the first proper EV that you would consider as buying as like a family car or something like that, because they're nice and spacious. Now, the first cars were here in Ireland, I think in 2011, and there are still plenty of those around going on their original batteries, happily enough. There might be some degradation there in the batteries, but I mean, you could be looking at getting into one of those for something like 6,000.
Right. Okay.
Now, I tend at this stage to look at the slightly newer models. So from mid 2013 onwards, the Nissan Leaf, they changed the battery chemistry, and they made some other upgrades to the design and offered different specifications. So I tend to, if possible, recommend people to get into those. Not just because they're slightly newer, but they're some of the issues with the first cars were resolved, such as the battery chemistry was improved. So mid 2013 onwards cars, we're selling good examples with sensible mileage and good battery health of those, from 7,000-8,000 euro, depending on the specification. So yeah, and obviously, as with any car, you know, price will depend on how it's been looked after, the servicing, mileage, and so on.
Is looking at a service history incredibly important with an EV, or is it is there no worse than a normal car?
The thing about EVs, I think, a lot of the issues that you would be concerned about in an ICE car with regards to servicing, historically I would have been very concerned to make sure that, for example, the oil was getting changed on a regular basis. Now, of course, in an EV, you don't have any oil to change, so the servicing is more of a lighter touch. So I'd say you obviously like to see that the car has been back to be looked at by a specialist. But yeah, I mean, I've taken cars with incomplete service history and not found any issues with them. So as long as you know what you're looking at, I think specifically in terms of the battery and just the general mechanical condition of the things like you would on any car, like the brakes and suspension and things like that, then you can have a fairly good idea. But in terms of the drivetrain and so on, that's fairly sealed, and at this stage the only people really who can look at them properly is the main dealers, because there isn't really an aftermarket, private garages aren't really doing this in any serious way yet, and that's something that we need to see. So yeah, I mean, if I take a car in, generally I'll always, unless it's only just been serviced in the last few months, I'll generally always put it in to the dealer to get a fresh service on it to make sure that everything is as it should be.
So tell us about this car we're in, the Renault Zoe.
Yeah, so this is a 2016, late 2016, and it's one of the 40 kilowatt cars. So the Renault Zoe originally came out in 2013 with a 24 kilowatt battery, and in late 2016 they brought out the 40 kilowatt version, which is, gave it almost twice as much range. So these cars, I mean, the manufacturers have their own figures based on WLTP or NEDC or whatever. I always quote based on my experience. These cars will do 200 to 240 kilometers realistically, depending on your type of driving. So yeah, I mean, the Zoe is, in my experience, very reliable. It's a slightly smaller car than the Leaf, but I mean, you're quite a big guy, so yeah, I mean,
I'm quite amazed by how spacious it is. I'm pretty comfortable.
Yeah, there's good headroom. There's good space in the back, and it has things like the ISOFIX for child seats and what have you. Yeah, it's a bit.
This would certainly be fine for a small family.
Yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
Fine for that.
Absolutely.
And I always kind of say that ranges. It's like the range minus the VAT. That's the real range. I think if you're that's about right. I think if you it's obviously a conversation people have a lot about range. I have an EV. I have a Skoda Enyaq, and the WLTP is 550, but I think of it as around 400. In terms of everyday use. So if you have advice for people who are getting into an EV, and obviously if they're buying a used EV and it's a 9,000 euro purchase, it's definitely going to be their first EV. What would you say to people, from your experience, are your top tips about managing your expectations of an EV?
You mean in terms of range and
adjusting to it, I suppose, because for some people I think there's a fear, and it's maybe a misplaced fear.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the misconceptions is, that maybe they'll be very slow.
Not
but
true.
They're actually not at all, and you know this from driving them yourself. Like even a fairly low-end car like the Leaf or the Zoe, they're very nippy.
Very much so.
Because you get all the power from 0 revs of the motor, so they feel very responsive. So you're not, probably if you're looking at an equivalently priced ICE car, this will feel infinitely more performant, like in terms of acceleration and things like that.
Obviously it's also the serenity, it's such a quiet, nice place to be. It's very comfortable.
It is,
It's an experience which you have, if you haven't had one, it's a much more calming drive. I've started to find that I'm driving around more now in my car with no radio on, or not listening to anything because I'm just enjoying that peace.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the summer, if you're driving along with the windows open, you can hear the birds singing and things like that. And you sort of forget what that's like if you've been used to driving a nice car for all that time. But yeah, I suppose, I mean, in terms of, I mean, all electric cars are automatics. Some people are a bit concerned about that because they will have been coming from a car with a clutch and a gearbox. But, you know, it takes very little adaptation, to be honest.
Forget about your left leg.
Exactly. Forget about the left leg and you'll be fine. And most people adapt fine within a couple of days, and it's really not a difficult thing to do. And you'll very quickly wonder why you spent all those years changing gear. And I suppose in terms of range, and if you are buying a used EV that maybe is one of the lower range models, what I always say to people is, you know, get used to the car. The figures we quote in terms of mileage, the range that they offer, we're realistic about it, but of course it depends on each individual driver. Yeah, so if you drive very fast, you won't get as much range as if you drive
on the motorway as well. Yeah, motorway speeds aren't really EV's friends, you know. But it's
no, and I suppose I recommend most people to, you know, 100 or 105, 110 max kilometers per hour on the motorway. Otherwise, it will eat into the range.
I had a Volkswagen e-Golf, and I used to deliberately. I used to commute from Drogheda to Dublin, and I used to deliberately leave at the busiest time on the M50.
Yeah,
because it was exactly the right speed for an EV. You could drive it at a 95, 100, and get the best range from the car.
Yeah.
While I have you, I have to ask you, really, I suppose, obviously from the A's perspective, about your thoughts on, you know, what the government can do to encourage people into EVs. You know, we were quite vocal after the budget came out, saying, you know, it's all very good extending the grants, but, you know, should something be done to help people who have, you know, not so much access to 30, 40, 50 grand to get into EVs?
Absolutely. And, you know, this is one of the things that I've been saying, particularly this year since Brexit, because our business model has had to change quite a lot this year in the face of Brexit, because we can't bring the sort of more affordable cars in from the UK anymore, because they attract, you know, 23% VAT, which makes them a lot more expensive. So yeah, I mean, I think in particular, and this plays into what is always being said about the move to e-mobility being a just transition, or that it should be a just transition. It's not just for people that can afford a 40, 50 grand car, or it definitely shouldn't be. It should be for everybody. So yeah, I think there's definitely room for incentives on used EVs, and, you know, I think as well, to help build our fleet here and get more affordable EVs on the road, there should be some relief on, you know, the duty and the VAT maybe on UK imports. We can only build our used fleet by importing from the UK, because we need right-hand drive cars, and you can argue all day whether that is right or wrong, but it is the way it is.
Because there was plenty of years where we were taking what the UK didn't want in terms of diesels, etc. So maybe it's time.
Yeah,
we were allowed to take some of their EVs.
Yeah, now. let's you know, and realistically, the numbers aren't going to be huge.
Yeah.
So in terms of what it might cost the government, you'd think it might actually be quite a good.
And we know supply is an issue for everything, but supply is an issue in particular for EVs, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about PHEVs, because I know it can be a slightly controversial subject. Now, we know this week there's been the announcement of the dropping of the grants from January.
Yeah.
And look, we knew it was going to end at some stage. Everyone knew that. But could they have waited a little bit longer to allow people to adjust, rather than you know, July was 5,000 to 2,500, then January gone? What's your thoughts on that?
I think the amount of notice is an issue, and I suppose I see it very much from the point of view of how the dealers feel about it, because they may have ordered stock already for next year.
Which was true. Yeah.
And that causes them a big problem. But, you know, that aside, I mean, I think you're right. PHEVs are good for certain use cases, if people are plugging them in and using them to the use cases that actually work for them, which typically would be, you know, the sort of people that should be being sold PHEVs are maybe people who have a fairly short commute or fairly low mileage of an average day, maybe 20 or 30 kilometers, because that's what the batteries will give you, an EV only range. But they want the flexibility of doing much longer journeys, so they have the ICE engine to do that. And maybe they're people that can't afford a long range EV yet, so from that point of view, they're a sensible purchase in some situations.
I just wonder, I wonder, was there a view in government that, okay, we have a certain amount of money and all we can do with this, the best thing we can do with this money is further the EV cause, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose part of the problem is that if you're giving people grants for PHEVs and they're buying them and they're not plugging them in, we're using good money and not solving a problem. At least if you're spending the money on pure BEVs, you can guarantee that you're reducing emissions. You can't do that with a PHEV, and that's problematic. I mean,
there is two sides of it. I think the timing could have been better, but I think everyone knew that it was never going to be forever, as it will be with BEVs as well. That can't be an incentive indefinitely.
No, absolutely not. And it's been extended out again in the budget. Is it to the end of 23?
2 more years.
Yeah. So, and that's great. And the dealers must be pleased with that, and the manufacturers, because it gives them the certainty that they've been asking for a long time, because it was getting increased by a kind of year here and a year there, quite piecemeal.
I think the difficulty for Irish customers in particular is because they're all a little bit apprehensive about what's going to happen and what to do, and without the certainty that something's going to be there for a while, people maybe will just sit on their hands and do nothing and stay in the car that they're in, which in a lot of cases is a not particularly clean car.
Exactly, and I suppose, and this is why a lot of the dealers are really unhappy about the grants being taken away from the PHEVs, because there is an argument that says, well, you're not going to convince everyone to get into a BEV just yet, either because they're not ready or it doesn't fit.
And there aren't enough.
There isn't enough supply. There might not be enough supply of PHEVs either. But I mean, some people say it's like a PHEV's a good stepping stone to an EV. I mean, I'm not sure how much I subscribe to that view. I mean, for some people maybe you need to do that, but my experience of owning and living with EVs, I drive an EV every day, is that I transitioned fairly easily, and I was driving very low range EVs at the beginning. You very quickly get used to the capabilities of the car, and as long as you don't buy something that doesn't fit your needs, then you should be fine.
But the charging network has got better, but a few years ago when I had an e-Golf, which didn't have the greatest range, but crossing the country was a little bit stressy at times because the network at the time in particular was patchy. You'd get to a spot, the charger didn't work, and if you're heading to Cork, you're in trouble that way. But I think it's much better now. The hubs are better. Junction 14 is very, very good. Portlaoise is very good. So I think that fear should really be dissipating now. So Simon, slight change of scene. We've jumped into a Nissan Leaf. What year is this Leaf?
So this one's a 2015.
Okay, so what battery has this got?
So this has got the 24 kilowatt battery. So that gives you a range, I always quote, about 120 kilometres.
Okay, so this is probably, if you're nipping out to the school or nipping out to the shops, it's fine. Your average daily commute.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I always say to people is if you're doing less than 100 kilometres a day, then this car could suit you.
Yeah, obviously you have wall box at home as well, just to take a little bit less of the pressure off.
Yeah.
But it's a really well equipped car, isn't it?
It is, and this one's like the Techno or SVE spec, I think they call it in Ireland. So it's really nice, like leather seats, heated steering
of course the
wheel.
original of the species as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this was the first proper EV family car, really. So
obviously, this is probably the obvious choice for someone's just starting off an EV, right?
Yeah, I mean, I this or a a Zoe.
Zoe, yeah.
You know, if you're looking.
But budget-wise, this is really the entry point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, a lot of people come to me saying, you know, can I get something for 8 to 10 grand?
Yeah.
And you know, this
is where you
fit that bill. I mean, this is a higher spec car, so it's a little bit more than that. But I mean, yeah, you can. Yeah, I sold a very similar 2014 the centre spec, which is the mid-spec model, for 8,000 a few weeks ago, with really good battery health. So yeah, it fits in that budget quite nicely, depending on what spec you want.
And this obviously ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of family car, you know, seating for 5, decent sized boot. Yeah, but it's quite a nice place to be. You know, the look of it obviously is, you know, it definitely says you're an EV. It does.
Yeah.
you know you're driving an EV when you're in a Leaf, but it's no, it's a clever car, and for the money as well. And you know, to consider that, you know, people are going to certainly going to worry and say, look, how long is this car going to last me? You wouldn't have any issues with this then?
No, I mean, like, so this particular car, so it's 6 years old. It's over 6 years old because it's an early 2015. 85% on the battery health, so it's lost 15% in 6 years, and it's done 97,000 kilometers.
Wow.
So yeah,
so you know, if you'd lost another 15 in another 6 years, how bad?
Exactly. So it's, you know, it's going to be good for at least another 6 years. You know, I think the general wisdom is probably when the battery gets to about 70%, then, you know, maybe it's, you know, the range is getting to a point where it's might not be useful. But again, that really depends very much on like your individual circumstances. If you're only doing 50 kilometers a day, it will be good for even longer.
But I suppose being devil's advocate for a second, you know, talking about sustainability, there is an argument. Someone might say, look, I've a 15, 20-year-old Volkswagen Golf that serves me well and I don't need to change it. You know, what's the argument of that versus an EV that you might, in theory, have to change every 6-7 years?
Well, I mean, I think we're already starting to see, you know, battery replacement extension services. There's a company set up recently in Kildare, and we're only going to start seeing more of that. And what you got to remember about a battery in an EV is that battery can have a second life. So even if it only lasts 10, 12, 15 years in an EV, these batteries are going to be repurposed for things like home energy storage. So somewhere for you to buffer what your solar PV is generating, so that you can use that energy when the grid's expensive.
Right.
So the battery isn't like throw it away after it's finished in the car. It'll have another life, and which means it still has value as well. So yeah, you might need to swap out your battery at some point, 12, 15 years down the road, depending on how much mileage you're doing, how, you know.
Can you explain to us as well, just slightly off topic, but in terms of charging ports, so this is a Shademo, is that likely to become obsolete in the future, or is it going to soldier on?
So, I mean, most new cars now are standardising to the CCS port. But having said that, the Nissan Leaf that's still being sold today, and
Lexus as well,
and the Lexus which only just came out, still use Chademo. There's an awful lot of Chademo plugged socket.
How did that happen? Was it kind of a VHS Betamax kind
Absolutely,
of thing?
yeah. I mean, different people just developed the technology the way they wanted to do it, and there's Type 2 as well, of course. On some of the older Zoes only have Type 2. So yeah, there's 3 standards really. I mean, what we're all expecting to see now is that everything converges to CCS, but all of the discussions I've had with charging operators, they're going to support Chademo for
some time to come.
The new car's still being built with those plugs on them, so they need to. And then I think the expectation is at some point you might need to do a conversion, but there are already conversions available. I think there's a company called Moxan in the Netherlands, and I believe they're doing port conversions as well. So
yeah, I can't
that's
imagine it's impossible.
No. So I think that, you know, that will be covered off. You know, if you're buying one of these cars now and you're saying you're going to keep it for 5 years, then there'll still be plenty of Chatamo sockets in 5 years. I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Listen, thank you for your time today, Simon. I think what we've learned, I suppose, is that, you know, you don't necessarily need to fear a used EV, because, you know, once they've been minded, once you use your head and use the same sort of checks you would do for buying any used car, then you can have quite a nice vehicle for a decent price, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the advice is, you know, learn a bit about what you're buying, do a bit of research. You know, if you're going to go and buy one privately, then obviously it would be helpful if you had your own diagnostic equipment so you could check the battery. But yeah, you know, there's a few of us specialist EV dealers around. We've been selling these cars for a while, so we know, you know, what the story is with them. With other dealers, I can't really speak. You know, you'd want to be kind of in a similar situation to if you're buying privately. You'd want to, you know,
just do your due diligence, I guess.
Due diligence, yeah.